ask bond journalists during presentation, because now we have ones that don't have any, and it would be too. Anyway, is in that same way. I don't know that Thomas Aquinas ever did anything other than be a clerk and an academic, so it's sort of like he's discussing this. He's discussing competent military planners, but he doesn't have any experience as far as I know. But the other thing that I'm curious about is if you could turn all of those things around and say, well, if you were someone who's just in a position of you are hiring a defense firm to defend the office building you own, whatever. So put it more in the, sorry this is anarcho-capitalist today, here's Steve, which I'm even kind of on the borderline, but just in terms of discussing it, are any of these things that you should be thinking about in terms of who you hire? Like clearly you wouldn't want to hire somebody who's more competent than less competent, because if you hire somebody and they're kind of your agent, and then they do things that are wrong, you might have various liabilities that you have to shell out money for. They tow the wrong person's car, whatever it is. They frisk in some. They search someone for weapons who's coming into the shopping mall that you own in a way that provokes a lawsuit because it was too invasive or whatever, or it just loses you business. So you would want to hire somebody who's more competent than less. I'm wondering if these rules are if there's any way that a person could just take them and sort of turn them sideways and also look at them in terms of if you're hiring between firms A, B, and C, either now just hiring security staff at a shopping mall or in an actual kind of anarcho-capitalist situation, if they would be applicable in that kind of situation. Applicable in the sense of these are things that you need to do, and it's even in your interest to do as a consumer of defense services.
There's a good body of literature on this within the libertarian, Rothbard, Bob Murphy has a little pamphlet that's a fun read on a private defense agency and insurance and things like that, and what kinds of criteria would they have to meet before they do that. And Rothbard was a fan of just war theory also, and applied it in exactly the way you're talking about. Like, if you hire someone in defense, when are they justified in using violence and stuff? And so the scenarios are basically meeting these criteria that you they're guilty of something, or that there's imminent threat, or all these different kinds of things. So clearly defense, either on the individual level or the national level, is justified in most cases, most or all cases, right? The more interesting question, and the harder one to answer, I think, is these kinds of humanitarian ones, where it's a third or fourth party in a battle, and you're trying to save lives is a goal, but at what means are justified, and then what means are justified in doing that, or is it a just cause to begin with? If you have to engage in evil in order to do it, is engaging in evil ever justified?
They're always carried out so badly, though.
Right. That's another thing to consider.
I mean, even the sort of paradigmatic case of Hitler. Like, yes, the U.S. and its wealth and also manpower helped liberate Europe, but they could have flown over, I would think, and blown up train tracks and death camps long before they put them out of operation, and also they could have accepted refugees. So it's not like they did anything in any well thought out, efficient way to sort of maximize saving people's lives who were scheduled for death. So.
And if you accept the Samantha Power R2P responsibility to protect,
right, then you have to keep doing it everywhere.
Yeah, where do you stop?
We should be in Russia right now policing streets in Moscow to prevent gay bashing.
Yeah, exactly.
Or in Africa, all the genocides that are going on there, and no one's even raised a word about it, and people say that it has to do with because there's no natural resources in that area. It's not a strategic geographic location, whereas the Middle East is. So
I'm curious how many people here. So I don't actually lean towards the complete conspiratorial theory that every time the U.S. Military gets involved in the country, it's always about either that they're threatening to stop using the dollar as a medium of exchange, or that they have oil that could be extracted. And there are a lot of people who do. Like, there's a guy who actually should come to these, whose name is Jason Shore, who's just moved to Northern Virginia from Pennsylvania. He's a libertarian, and he regularly posts things like that around. And I don't think they're necessarily wrong. I just don't think there's enough evidence for it. But there are people who believe that's always true. And I actually think it's really things more like whoever the president in charge is, it's his ego, it's kind of bureaucratic inertia, it's the fact that we just believe that we should always intervene, and then we have this huge military, and what else can you do with it except intervene, and it's stuff like that. But I'm curious how many people here think that, like, our threatening to get involved in Syria or Iran is actually, instead of a kind of humanitarian impulse or bureaucratic inertia or just the bipartisan consensus that that's what you do, think that it's actually a conspiratorial thing where, maybe conspiratorial is wrong, but that it's actually really about either someone's getting access to oil and other minerals, or it's about who is or is not threatening to stop using the dollar as a reserve currency. Does anyone here think that those are like really big motivations?
Well, I mean, I don't know about conspiracy, but I do think that the Washington establishment just does not like when people don't recognize that they're the rulers. And Syria and Iran and North Korea and Iraq were like the ones who were, and Venezuela and Libya. They are the ones who they're not really powers, but they're like, at least they're mid-level countries that were trying to circumvent. And so
I think that it's too complex and there's too many people involved. I mean, I personally think people have a fear that if the U.S. is not engaged in conflict with, say, Iran, that nuclear power is going to explode all over the world. Rwanda wasn't, just at the time didn't fit, for example, too many people's interests. I don't know how to say that. I think you have to consider the fourth dimension too.
But they have to be a big enough bully for anyone to pay attention to them. If they're just really teeny, then nobody cares what they do to their own people.
Well, there's too many people involved making decisions, and their opinions may not be completely different, or their reasons may not be completely different, but they're at least slightly different.
There probably, I mean, if you had 500 decision makers, you probably have 500 different biases. And
Which
so,
overlap, though.
Which overlap. And so in some cases, where we decide to get involved, where we decide not to get involved, or where we decide to, some people on our behalf, was trying to speak on our behalf anyway, try to use force. It's, maybe as simple as, people in this country don't know care that much about what happens in most of Africa, for example, or at least sub-Saharan Africa.
So it's kind of a public choice problem as well.
It's
for
a public-
politicians.
And people care about the Middle East because Israel is one of the reasons. Oil is one of the reasons. Just the fact that it's sort of the crossroads of much of the world. Coming together, Africa, Asia, and Europe coming together. That makes it important in itself to some degree, and so we are interested in that. And then I think a lot of the motivation is, frankly, I think there are people who want to come in on the side of Sunni Islamo-fascists. And they don't want to necessarily back Al-Qaeda, but that's the effect of what they're doing. And so, that's one reason to get in Syria is if you wanted to tilt it toward the other side in the civil war, and or in Egypt, and overthrowing Mubarak, or in Libya, getting rid of Gaddafi, and so on. So I think some people's, but the problem with the conspiracy theory is just that there are all these different motivations that overlap. And so if you point out, if you say that they're doing it for this evil purpose, well, yeah, there are some people that are doing it for some evil purpose because, they support the Islamo-fascists and want them to win, and they're over here. But then there might be other people who are, have what we would consider much purer motives. Maybe they want to protect innocent people, they think that they can bring democracy to the area and freedom, and they're working with them, you know, that, in common cause for the
bedfellows.
yeah,
Sometimes.
yeah, and that happens in every war. You know, you have people who line up with we teamed up with U.S. government teamed up with Stalin to beat Hitler.
I think it's undeniable that the DoD pays much more attention to the Suez Canal than some other area because of the economic factors involved. But I don't take the pure conspiratorial position that even a lot of lefty friends have, that the only reason why the government invaded Iraq is for Exxon's profits. You know, I think that maybe some people saw that as, you know, a nice benefit, a nice perk, that the war will pay for itself because we'll nationalize the oil fields or whatever, right? Some people thought that was a good idea, but I don't think that was the only motive. In fact, I kind of agree with, or you might agree with me, Bruce, that maybe getting revenge for what Daddy Bush failed to do might have had a part of, not the only thing, but part of the motive for wanting to take out Saddam Hussein.
Or that they tried to have Daddy Bush assassinated.
Assassinated, revenge for his attempted assassination. You know. So I don't think there's one cause. I think it's a coalition of things, like what you're talking about, Steve. So these other ones, a lot of these other ones we've already mentioned. So I'll just mention them and we'll kind of move on. But a lot of it has to do with, like Gavin's point about the lack of knowledge and knowing the outcomes of your actions. You have a high probability of success that you shouldn't engage and commit to war if you don't think you'll succeed. And most importantly, it should be a last resort. We should try all other peaceful means first. Proportionality, anticipated benefits of waging war must be proportionate to its expected evils or harms. Now this is kind of goes back to our comparative justice one, where if you're going to have to engage in evil in order to bring about justice, is that just? I don't know. That's a tough one. Do you have any final thoughts on that issue about if you have if you're Kantian on ethics and you have a rules-based ethics system that it's never right for an individual to break these rules. These rules apply to everyone. The alternative is more of a utilitarian or consequentialist point of view where you're trying to maximize the good even if you have to do some bad. Where do you guys fall in line on this? Do you agree more with Kant? You know, a natural rights perspective that no individual can ever break those rules? Or do you take a consequentialist view, generally speaking? Not sure yet. Not sure yet as a okay answer.
I would say the former.
Okay. Natural rights.
Yeah.
Do you have an idea? Undecided.
Well, yeah, I love these questions. I'm thinking out in this context for the first time because I essentially deal with it by going back to George Washington and the whole idea of not having entangling alliances and not and being offering friendship to all peoples and then of course they do something bad to us, then we're free to respond. So I think more in terms of those, but it's important to get back to first principles. So and some of the aspects of just war theory are based in a world that's kind of different from the world that we live in today in terms of state-sponsored terrorism and things like that. And even assigning responsibility for actions. I mean, you could have a biological attack tomorrow and we wouldn't know who did it, and theoretically it could be done in a way that we wouldn't even know for sure that was an attack. There are competent people who think that West Nile entered the United States.
West Nile virus?
Yeah, West Nile virus, and that's not crazy conspiracy theory. That's
Is it an attack on us or something that we created?
Basically a test attack on us. And, so anyway, so my point is that we don't now we have questions of you know, it's not like an invading army. Oh, those are all a bunch of, that's, look, the French army's coming, you know.
Where people wore uniforms on both sides.
Uniforms and all of that sort of thing. Now it's a kind of a different world. And so what I would suggest is going back, which is the discussion we're having here, going back to the first principles and saying, well, how does this apply in today's world and going forward?
I mean, most people here, maybe probably all, are not a fan of the NSA, but a lot of, some people would say that, yeah, maybe it's a necessary evil if you're trying to deal with these complex problems, and I disagree, but it goes back to the first principles. Is it ever justified to engage in evil if you're trying to do it for greater good? Do you have any ideas on this, Bruce? Not yet? That's the fundamental question, I think, that, and I'm not trying to like give you the answer. I'm just proposing it. Really think about it going forward and all these ideas. Another necessity. That's pretty much. Oh, fair treatment of prisoners of war. It's obvious. So, is inaction in a scenario where you could save lives? Is inaction a sin of omission? Are you guilty of murder by failing to stop someone else's murder? Or in the case of John Brown, right? If you're not actively trying to abolish slavery, are you guilty of slavery even if you don't like slaves?
Is it? I had a little trouble with the guilt. Or maybe this is a different.
Well, you can even say,
This
like
is-
right now, if you're not like doing anything to advance liberty, if you're aware of the issue, are you guilty? Are you culpable for bad things the government's doing because you're not taking any part in?
So, yeah, let me add in that this isn't actually a part of just war theory anymore. These are some questions, just often related, but not directly part of just war theory. So, is inaction a sin of omission in these kinds of humanitarian scenarios where, genocide is going on?
I think it can be a breach of ethics, but not of morality. In other words,
Or
you're unethical in not helping somebody, not preventing a murder, but you're not guilty of murder as a result.
You're not guilty the same way the person actually committed the crime. Yes.
That
You
seems
may be,
obvious, right?
you may be you may be not as good a person as you would be if you had done more of that.
like the drowning child
So
scenario.
it's just a
where-
matter of gradations then, what you're saying?
No, I don't think it's well, I think it's even two different kinds of things.
It's a question of ethics versus,
Well,
you haven't done something immoral, why not?
well, you might not have lived your best life, although it depends on what like, all of us could go over and try to police gay bashing in Moscow if we really wanted to, but we probably have more important things to do in our own lives, but there's
opportunity costs.
there's clearly some
Yeah.
balance.
But you could use the same logic to say if you're not contributing towards finding a cure of cancer, are you guilty
Right.
of people
Mhm.
dying of cancer?
And the thing is, there are a limited number of things you can do, and they're limited,
Right.
a lot of it has to do with strategy. I mean, Frederick Douglass did try to talk John Brown out of it, and ended up being associated with the raid and had to leave the country because there were people after him thinking that he was involved in the raid. And so, Frederick Douglass was.
They found out that he had talked to the terrorist even though they didn't have the
Right,
NSA
because
spy on
he
him.
actually had, he'd been talking to, I had conversations with Osama bin Laden, I told him, don't attack the
Don't
World Trade
bomb
Center,
it.
oh, sure you did, I mean, that's the attitude that people
Yeah.
had at the time. So, there's a question of choosing your fights, and that's, you can be ethical and moral, and yet realize, well, that's an evil, I can't do anything. I have a friend who is was a concierge at the, I guess Ritz-Carlton at Tyson's Corner, and had a problem about, well, what happens when the Kuwaitis come in and they bring their slaves with them? And do I have a moral responsibility to try to help the slaves escape? But what if they don't want to, I mean, what if, I mean, because they're afraid, think about it, you're in a foreign country, it's a totally different culture, you don't know what's gonna happen to you if you try to get away, you might get caught, but even if you don't get caught, what kind of world are you gonna be in? Is it really worse than what you're living now? So you have all these questions, and then it comes back to the morality of the person there, you know, who's seeing this happen, but, and what could she do? If she did it once, she'd be out of a job, she'd never get to do it again. So, you know, that all comes into play. And with regard to South Africa, remember you had, what was it, Sullivan Principles for dealing with South Africa, which was, like if you operate a company in South Africa, you know, you couldn't have segregated facilities or something, things like that, where, in other words, you would sort of subtly undermine the process. And, you know, people have that conflict with regard to China now. I mean, you know, you've got an economy built largely on slave labor of a sort, and, you know, if you have a factory in China, then should you have a policy that people who work in your factory can have unfettered access to the internet to get ideas? Well, you probably won't be allowed to have a factory in China if you do that, but that's an example of the kind of thing where you could maybe take a stand in some area, and then you'd be, you know, I mean, Schindler's List, he didn't, you know, he was constrained in what he could do, and he did, people consider that to be the best that he could under the circumstances. And that was what, you know, and he's a great hero and so forth. So.
If you recall my earlier comment about the difference between cosmic justice and maybe or human karmic justice, where in cosmic justice is almost like a cop-out, in my opinion, by saying that eventually you're going to get what's due to you somehow, some way. So I don't need to do something to right that wrong, because you know, the universe will take care of it. Whereas if we talk about karmic justice at a human interpersonal level, but then the question is raised is, well, whose responsibility is it to bring about justice? And if you say the state, then you have to start asking other questions. You know, is the state often just? It's usually unjust in almost all regards, you know, no matter how you view it. So these are some very difficult questions as to what kind of, what's your responsibility to aid in a free society the administration of justice? Something to think about. I don't know the answer to that, but yeah.
I have a book, a novel I want to write, which is, it's going to have two directions. So, you know, like those magazines that you read one,
okay,
and you turn it over and you have to
yeah.
flip it. And on one side, it's as advanced physicists discover that there's through like, you know, their studies of molecules or whatever, they discover there's life after death. They found heaven in their advanced, or they're studying the stars.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens in that society? Well, people realize that they're going to live forever. So they say, we're not going to compromise. And peace reigns on earth. Everyone all of a sudden goes crazy fighting for their beliefs. And then on the other book, the other side, it's a parallel story, but it's people, the scientists discover they can prove that we die. They show like what the human soul is, and they prove that this is the only chance we get. And what happens then? Everyone says this is our only chance.
Yeah.
So they go crazy, you know, fighting for their beliefs, and peace reigns on earth. So it comes to the same conclusion. But
Yeah.
I was just thinking about that when you talk about human justice or cosmic justice, or, you know.
Yeah, it's a tough one. And how do we ensure justice gets administered in a free society? You know? So another thing to think about, blowback, obviously, any action you have, you don't always know what the consequences will be down the road, and how the other people who you're affecting, and how they'll react in the future. You know, it goes back to that knowledge problem. There's an incredibly high barrier, a hurdle to clear in terms of knowledge when you're engaging in any kinds of violence, to make sure that what you're doing is just, and that you're targeting the right people, and right, So something to think about there. Is if all property of the state is unjustly acquired, is therefore the use of force by the state too. We kind of talked about it before, like if China were attacking California, you know, we might say, well, those tanks were paid for unjustly with tax dollars, but, you know, please use them to kick out the Chinese. Would that be just or not? Something to think about. If the states are sovereign, here's a real interesting, think about this in drone strikes especially. If states are sovereign, not that we necessarily agree with that, but if we do, even, you know, President Obama believes that, surely. Well, maybe not actually. If states are sovereign, isn't our policy hypocritical to be, you know, droning in Pakistan? Because you wouldn't be able to turn the table and say, well, could Pakistan launch drones into the U.S.? Would we be okay with that? We'd say, hell no. So why is our foreign policy, American foreign policy, just in that regards? You know? Let's wrap up there, because that's a good discussion. But any final comments on that, or just think about justice and how it would get administered in a free society? When Chris read something, he talked about if you don't water the plant or something, the roots will wither up and the tree will. That reminded me of a quote by George Washington. I think it was George Washington. It was Jefferson. Talking about watering the tree of liberty. I think it's Jefferson. Yeah. So that's kind of something I'd like to think of this as. Every so often we're watering our tree of liberty inside of us, and hopefully one day these efforts will bear fruit, and hopefully we enjoy it in the meantime too. So let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned today, and here's what I want you to think about. How can you integrate what we've talked about into your life, and how can you use this information to influence those around you? How can you change your own thinking and action? And how can you affect those around you? How can you take the lessons of John Brown or of theories of justice, and how do we interact with each other and maybe convince other people? Just think about that. Okay, well, thank you all for coming. This was a lot of fun. Good to see you guys again. Are you gonna swing by the Chinese place again? Sure. Okay. We have a little running tradition here. We
Secretly a Jewish group. We have Chinese food.
we can go eat some dim sum. And
Well, the Chinese restaurant will be open on our holidays, so there you go. Now, do we have any?
yeah, we need to come up with some libertarian holiday. That's a good idea. Let's write that.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
Now, if we have government employment, we should be like, this is a
Our religious holiday. And there should be a lot of them. So if they hire a libertarian, they have to let them off like 30 days a year.
No, we should, if they shut down the government, we should like do a blessing.
That would actually be, I think we really should. If there's actually a furlough day, or because of whatever, like the debt ceiling, there's actually, we should actually go and have, somebody's gonna have to wear robes. And we should actually go like to the Washington Monument or something, or reflect a hole. Light some sage or